Let me thank you all for coming and welcome you to the 2013 guest lecture series. And tonight we're going to start off our lecture series with Professor Art Bettis from the Department of Geoscience in Iowa City, Iowa, at the University of Iowa. And as a brief bio of Art here, I've known Art for 15, 20 years? A long time. Yeah. Since before he got into the professorial business. Now what he does is studies long-term stream behavior and landscape evolution, and also the impact of humans on landscapes in a number of different areas, both here in the Midwest where we live, but as well as in Alaska. He's done work in Indonesia as well as Argentina, so he gets around, he travels. The 5-hour drive to here was not much of a big deal to him at all. So he is also the academic coordinator of the environmental science program at University of Iowa, so most of the people in aquatic ecology, they're back there, they know Art, they like Art, he's a good guy. So he's currently directing a very interesting project on monitoring the performance of stormwater control measures that add ecological value to urban types of landscapes in the Iowa City area. And for the last 4 years, he's spearheaded stream assessment by citizens and students that provide the Iowa City, City of Iowa City with information on sort of how to prioritize the various stream programs that they have, repairs and restorations. And so tonight, Art is going to talk on civic and citizen participation, partnering to address stormwater runoff in Iowa City. So let's give Art a big welcome.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Steve 2, is what I am. I have Steve's old position at the university, at least for the environmental science program is concerned anyway. Yeah, well, it's good to be back here. Last time I was here was a little different looking. What was it? Late fall, I think it was, something like that. Yeah, it's a lot prettier today. Maybe not tomorrow. Anyhow, yeah, it's kind of interesting that I decided to do this talk given the last 2 or 3 weeks worth of weather. It's once again in Iowa City we're going to be flooded. We got the word from the Corps today that the emergency spillway is going over. So we're back, probably not like it was in 2008, but 2093 I think is what they were doing. Anyhow, yeah, what I want to talk about, this is going to be a real data poor talk, okay? I'm not going to throw any data at you at all. Not graphs and stuff, anyway, or numbers. It's more or less just a kind of a thing that we've been working on for a while in Iowa City, both from the university as well as from the city. My co-author here, Brenda Nations, is the environmental coordinator of the city of Iowa City on the side of my wife. She couldn't come up tonight, but anyhow, it's sort of this thing we've cooked up. She used to work for the university too, and when she was working for the university, she was in charge of the environmental science labs. And as part of that laboratory, we started a service learning project aspect to the environmental science labs, and we partnered with a bunch of nonprofits and the city of Iowa City to basically provide bodies to do projects and to have the students actually get experience doing something rather than just reading about it. And this has sort of evolved into this thing where we've actually got a real program going now. It's really a cooperative program between the university, citizens in town, and the city of Iowa City. And everybody benefits, and I just want to talk a little bit about what we've got going and what we have here. So, first off, let's talk about something you all probably know about, but this is sort of the reason why we're interested in doing this thing, is the hydrologic cycle, okay? When we start out with a landscape that doesn't have what are called impervious surfaces on it, roofs, streets, sidewalks, parking lots, all kinds of things we do, places where we walk over a lot, paths, okay? We start out with this sort of a situation where there's a balance in the cycle, in the hydrologic cycle, where you have some evaporation, you intercept some of the rainfall. There's some of the rainfall infiltrates, in fact a lot of it infiltrates, and returns to the streams as base flow or inflow or the lakes. Okay? And so you don't end up with a whole lot of surface runoff usually. Okay, maybe in the early spring when the snow melt, when the ground's still frozen, you have some, but generally you don't. But when we start messing around with the land surface as far as impacting the impervious surfaces, we really upset that balance a lot. And what happens is we decrease the amount of evapotranspiration, there's a lot less interception, and we also change the hydrologic infiltration characteristics of the surface itself. So what ends up happening is there's less opportunity for water to infiltrate into the soil. And so what happens is there's more surface runoff. And when there's more surface runoff, there's less of this interflow too. Okay. And what that does is it puts water into surface water bodies, streams and lakes, really fast, much faster than before. Now, that in and of itself isn't such a bad deal, although it does have repercussions. But along with that, there's more than just water in this stuff now that we've messed around with the land surface. We have fertilizers and pesticides on lawns and fields. We have oils, brake linings, that sort of stuff on streets, and salt that we put on the streets, and sediment. And that all gets incorporated into the runoff too, and enters streams and lakes much more rapidly than it ever did without getting filtered, essentially. And that's really the crux of the problem. So here's just sort of an idea of what happens with water. Okay, so we're looking at 3 inches of rain, okay? And that's more rain than we usually get, but this is just the numbers add up properly this way. Oh, now see I moved it slightly, now I gotta move it off that. Oh! That's back up, okay. Okay, so here's our regular before any kind of development, where we basically get 2.4 inches of it as infiltration. 2.4 inches of it goes into the ground, and we get a little over half an inch of runoff. When you start changing from a forest canopy to just a meadow, or let's say a lawn, okay, all of a sudden you're not changing things much anymore at all, okay? You're still intercepting it, you're still infiltrating a lot. But when you start going to actually disturbing the soil surface, you start to change the infiltration characteristics. Here we start with, a third of it begins to run off, but then what really happens is the impervious surfaces really start to have the big impact. This is a 38% impervious surface, more runoff than infiltration. It only really takes about 10% impervious surface to start having a big impact. Once you get to 10% from there on up, the amount of runoff increases just really dramatically. So I thought I'd just show you that this happens everywhere. This is Center Lake. Okay. 1930. It's that row crop field. A third of the water's running off. Here we are in 2009. We've got in this scene here, there's about 20% impervious surface. Okay, so you're probably more than half of your stormwater is running off. In this case, predominantly right into Center Lake. And with that, though, you're also carrying, like I said, all that other stuff that's in the runoff. You're carrying the brake lines, anything that goes on in those parking lots, anything that's on those rooftops. Okay, so there's lots and lots and lots of impact here. But we're just going to kind of focus on the amount, not the other stuff that's there. But what really got me interested in this, what really I think is the important thing is, okay, yeah, it's a kind of a bad situation, but look, this is what we're in for here, okay? This is for Iowa, okay? Now, Iowa State put this out, I think Gene Tackley's did. Look at this, 31% increase in heavy precipitation forecasted for the upper Midwest. In the climate change scenario, this would be over the next 20 years, okay? This problem of runoff gets greater and greater and greater the more heavy precipitation there is. That's the problem, okay? It's not the total amount of precipitation, it's how fast it comes down. If you spread our 32 inches over the year like we normally have, no problem. If you change that distribution or you increase that amount, this is really touching almost. then you can have really big problems. So really what we're in for here is a major change in big storms and the kind of things like we've been seeing where we get a week of extended precipitation, which is going to make this runoff situation even worse than it already is. Okay, so here's kind of what in Iowa City, they built this Eastside Recycling and Environmental Education Center as part of a demonstration, really. To engage the public, we've partnered with them on this, and we're kind of using it as an area to show things to people, okay? For citizens or whoever else wants to go there, and there's all kinds of programming there. But anyhow, in 2009, this is what Eastside looked like. It was a parking lot, had been a former asphalt plant, okay? It's brownfield, nasty stuff. This flat area here was about 15 feet of car bodies and 55-gallon barrels and all kinds of stuff, okay? And so what the city decided they were going to do with this thing is they were going to try to get as high a LEED rating as they could. For LEED is leadership and energy and
efficiency and design.
There we go, efficiency and design. Okay, so it's a rating system for buildings that includes a whole bunch of different things. It goes all the way from the materials you use to the impact that your structure has, okay, and the materials that are built into the structure. So part of the deal with this one is they recycled as much as they could of this material here. So the parking lot was torn up and recycled. Whoops.
Maybe if you minimize it, it won't keep popping up.
Really?
I don't know.
Right,
It's a theory.
It's a theory.
We tried closing the program.
Yeah.
It won't close.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah. Anyhow, this is Steve's fault.
Yeah.
Anyhow, this is what it looked like in 2009. This is the design concept. Okay, so they were there's a stream that runs along it here. This is the center, and then they've also got a place called Restore, which basically recycles construction materials and home materials. So if you don't use all your paint or you don't use all your tile or you replace your vanity or whatever, you can take it to Restore and they resell it. And there's also a what's the other one called? Their furniture project where they when they demolish old houses, they reclaim as much of the woodwork and that sort of stuff out of it. So it's got a whole bunch of things. It's also got a large amount of recycling. There's an oil recycling facility and there's compost and mulch and all sorts of stuff. That's the whole idea behind it. It's a whole bunch of things. But what we're going to talk about is this. This is what they decided their mission was. They wanted to demonstrate a variety of sustainable practices. Okay, all the way from practices that a homeowner can use to practices that businesses can use, or in some cases the university could even use. Okay, to show what they look like, to demonstrate how they function, and to let people sort of get a hands-on kind of a thing, like we'll talk a little bit down the way, okay? And so basically, it's a place where there's environmental education on many fronts, and we're just going to focus on the stormwater stuff here. So they did a whole bunch of different stormwater practices at this facility. They have porous concrete, permeable pavers, a green roof, living wall, rain gardens, and biocells. I'm going to talk about a few of them. They weren't all successful. First of all, the porous concrete. Okay, porous concrete, there's actually a really good example of porous concrete over in Arnold's Park at the Maritime Museum. It looks a lot like this, except theirs is made out of sioux quartzite. But the idea is it's open framework concrete. Okay, so there's pores that water can get into very easily, and I'll show you how this stuff, what it looks like when it rains on it. Okay, so they've got a few areas of these. Permeable pavers, there's also some of those over there, but these are becoming more and more popular all over the place. I was just looking at a place over in Arnold's Park today, a resort that's got a big parking lot with this stuff. But the idea with permeable pavers is that the paver itself can be or may not be permeable. It varies. But the idea is that this joint is permeable. And usually there's a spacer put in there, or else the pavers themselves have a built-in spacer. And then that spacer is filled with either a uniform size material or a mixed size material that keeps it wide open. Okay, so the idea is that water falls on it and runs across and infiltrates into the paver. Underneath these, as well as underneath the permeable pavement, there are various levels of rock, crushed rock, usually 2 feet minimum, that has a chamber that basically retains the water. Okay? And then from that, there's all different sorts of designs. Some actually have a pipe in there that collects the water and exits it to a water body, okay, a storm sewer. Some of them actually just rely on infiltrating all the water. And depending on what your substrate is, you can do one or the other. Green roofs and living walls are a different story. These are sort of pricey for a couple reasons. Living walls aren't so bad, but green roofs are heavy. They are very, very heavy. So you don't retrofit these onto your building usually. You design your building for these, okay? But they're kind of cool because there's no runoff. And they also address the urban heat island thing because they don't reflect much radiation back, okay? Plus they're just kind of cool looking. Green walls, living walls, you can do these with retaining walls or whatever. They're just blocks, you can make them out of any kind of material that join together. This slopes back sort of this way, and then there's soil put in here, and plants grow out of it. This is only a year-old one here. Eventually, these will grow out and completely cover up the wall.
Can I ask you where that roof is?
That's in Iowa. It's Sedum for the most part. Yeah,
No, but where is it?
it's in Iowa City at the Eastside Recycling Center. Yeah, yeah, and it's. There are actually quite a few green roofs, not in Iowa City so much, but around. There's a couple in Des Moines. There's some great ones in Chicago, really big ones in Chicago. But anyhow, what this does too then is that eventually as the plants grow over here, this acts as an insulator for the building in the summertime, basically keeps it cooler than it would be. Also, the water, if you get a really heavy rain, the water that does through flow through this soil actually trickles down the green wall. And so, and then there's a collector down here, so you basically don't get any runoff. One of the things with LEED, they got this a LEED platinum building. You're not allowed to put gutters on the building with LEED. So you have to be able to address your water, your roof water somehow without gutters. There's also rain gardens on the site, and probably everybody in here is familiar with rain gardens. These are just little ones that are, residential size rain gardens. And the idea with a rain garden is, in this case, it's catching parking lot run in. It runs in here and collects in here and then infiltrates into a soil material that has a gravel base. For houses, this is often where you put your downspouts. This is a pretty standard kind of way to deal with roof runoff. And then there's biocells. These are called either biocells or bioswales, and we're not going to get into the difference between them because it's... But anyhow, these are a different thing. These are bigger, okay? These are the kinds of things that usually a business or a municipality would be constructing rather than an individual, unless you've got a really big place, okay? But the idea here is you've got a constructed depression that has usually about 4 feet of soil material that has a high infiltration capacity. And we'll talk a little bit about what that stuff is. And then underneath here, there's usually a sand layer and then a gravel collector with a pipe in it that drains water out of this thing once the water is infiltrated in. The idea with these is runoff enters these things, and some of the runoff gets stored in the soil. When it's running off a whole lot, there's a certain amount that can get stored as standing water in the depression. And then the water, as it infiltrates through here, comes in contact with the soil material and theoretically removes things like sediment and removes some of the pollutants. So it delays the time it takes for the water to get to the water body, to the stream of the lake, and it also cleans it up. It's a sort of dual function. Okay. So I'll show you a couple of these in action. And the sound's not working, but that's okay. This is a 2.5-inch rain we had in Iowa City in September, the year that these were built, okay? So here's Eastside, pavers over there. Here's the permeable pavement right here. And you can see the sheet wash running across here onto that permeable pavement. There's the biocells. They're starting to collect water. This is just after they were planted. This is not what it looks like today at all. This is 2 months after it was planted, okay? And there's the creek over here. This creek has a really small drainage area, but actually can flood up onto the biocells at times, okay? So, I'm sure you have one of these when this one ends. Got one that shows the permeable pavement working a little better.
You want to sound like that? If we plug that in.
That's okay, it's just me
Rainwater.
yakking.
We know it.
But the idea is it keeps the water from going right into the creek. And it's designed, here's the one I'll show. Okay, so here's the water running off this parking lot and sheet flow, and this is the permeable pavement. So that's standard pavement, this is permeable. And you can see it soaks right in. There's a place over here where the water gets really concentrated running off the parking lot, and it doesn't quite make it through the permeable paver. But this thing caught all that 2.5-inch rain. None of it got past that spot on this parking lot, which is a decent sized parking lot. That having been said, it failed. It lasted 2 years, and it plugged up. Which is pretty much the case of every permeable pavement I've ever heard of. So don't let somebody talk you into putting permeable pavement in, or permeable asphalt. They don't work.
Because we have that at the Arms Park and it hasn't plugged up and it's been there for like 5 years.
That doesn't work anymore.
It doesn't?
I was talking to those guys today, it runs off of it, just like it does everything else.
I thought you could,
Suck it
you know,
out, clean it.
blast it. take it-
Yeah, you can, but then you impact the actual integrity of the paver itself.
Okay.
The problem is sand. You know, we use sand on our streets and roads, and even if you don't use it on the streets and the roads, it gets on cars, and it plugs up the holes. And so, yeah, you can vacuum it out. So it would work if you were vacuuming it a lot. It's one of those, is it worth it? There's probably better solutions, yeah.
What if you used it somewhere that they didn't put sand on the road?
Then it works fine. It was developed in the South, and it works great there. The only thing there is that eventually dust will plug them up too, any dirt. Yeah,
What about getting street sweepers?
street sweepers are okay, but the problem is that there's a little holes that the stuff gets down into, so you have to vacuum it. That's the problem. Yep,
Have the pavers, the different kinds, have the bigger spaces, have those ever clogged up?
those work better. There are a lot of those being designed now. They suffer from the same sort of problem with sand, but there's some now that have pretty wide spaces, and they've figured out that if they use just a single size material to fill them up, that's sort of a moderate sized gravel, they work pretty well. The sand seems to flush through them, okay? And that's this one I was looking at over at Arnold's Park, spanning 7 years, and it still seems to be working okay. It's got some places though where it is plugged. But with both permeable pavement and asphalt, I don't think it's worth the money. Pavers do work, but you have to maintain them. That's the thing. Gotta maintain them. You have to sweep them and vacuum them, and don't salt or don't sand them. So the idea is you shouldn't need to sand them. That's the idea with permeable pavement too, is because it's open like that, the water doesn't collect and so you don't get ice on it. That's the whole idea.
Do they have any problems with freeze fracturing?
With what?
Freeze fracturing?
Not any more than regular concrete. Doesn't seem to be. I would guess that once they start to plug up, you would, because it'll stay moist and you'll have all kinds of freezing going on there.
One thing I was hoping to experiment with, but never could get, the idea was to put just drainage grates at the bottom of the hill, but to take that drainage grate and send it into either a biocell or a retention basin or something like that.
Yeah,
And that would accomplish a lot of the same things.
exactly. Yeah, there are these things called, what are they called? Gravel grates.
Yeah.
That essentially do that. They have a big chamber that they store water in. And yeah, there's all sorts of innovative. The idea is to keep the water from running off and once it enters your structure, to hold it there for a while. That's the idea. So anything that does that is great. The thing you need to realize though is that there's a lot of runoff. It's a huge volume. Anybody here at rain barrel? Yeah, you know how much water, you get a little tiny rain.
It takes to fill it.
65 gallon rain barrel, a little tiny rain. I have 4 of them on my house. I have 2 on each of 1/4 of my house. And if it rains 2/10 of an inch, they overflow. It's, you know.
So did you build rain gardens?
Yeah, I have a rain garden in my backyard.
So why ain't running right into your rain garden?
Well, that's what I do.
Okay.
Yeah. But then there's the other issue, and then we have this project going on. The other issue is, okay, you get the water to go in the ground. Then there's the thing of the basement. So, yeah, you can't win for losing at this game. Okay, yeah, so there's the rain garden. Yeah, this is the deal here, okay? Yeah, just look away there. Okay, so
I just run my.
this is the kind of thing that you know anybody can build, and they can vary. This is a basic infiltration rain garden where all the material infiltrates. You don't have to have any real special soil if you've got the right kind of soil to start out with. Okay, or you can, you know, if you've got really crappy soil, you can modify it pretty cheaply. You don't have to have this necessarily. It's drained. It basically takes away excess water. The idea is to have a depression, not too deep, but big enough that it can contain the water that you calculate comes off that part of your roof during whatever storm you're trying to capture. The other key with these things too is to have an overflow structure of some sort, to have a spot along the berm that's forming the down slope end that's a little bit lower and that's really armored pretty well with whatever, so that if it does fill up, it has a place to go over rather than finding its own way and blowing the thing out. But these are great because they, first of all, they accomplish what was really going on beforehand, only they localize it a lot more. Okay, so they gather that rain that's running off places and try to put it back into the ground. And then they also, with the plantings, you know, you get a lot of biodiversity. You can really get a whole lot of diversity in a really small area with these things. The idea is not to make them wet. They shouldn't be wet all the time, okay? Or you can design them so that you do have an area that does sort of be wet or stays wet. You can even incorporate little, water bodies in these things if you want to. But the whole idea is to have the water infiltrate, to have the roots uptake a lot of the water, and to basically pack a whole lot of vegetation and a whole lot of biogeochemical action into a small place. That it's treating the water, it's getting the water back into the ground rather than running across the land surface. But these only work for certain size areas, okay? Because once you scale up to a large area, then you have all sorts of other issues with, first of all, having to have a really large area, and then maintenance becomes a problem with these things eventually. They're pretty good for local. Okay, so here's some of the things that with this work we've been doing with Eastside. We also work with Project Green, which is a group of citizens in Iowa City that beautify town. Okay, they Project Green people originally were into cultivars real heavily, which many of them still are, but they've also really come around a lot, and a lot of them are into natives now too. Okay, so we work with the Project Green people quite a bit, and also a couple of the local landscaping places are into these, and Ion Exchange, which is a native plant place in eastern Iowa, to first off decide what plants are going to work in these biocells. Okay, because not all plants probably will. All plants don't like the same kind of conditions. These are situations where during heavy rainfalls they get flooded, and if we get in a situation like we are now, they may get pretty wet for extended periods of time. But the idea is to infiltrate the water so that eventually they do dry out. Okay, so what you want are plants that can handle those situations that also have pretty deep rooting systems. So you want them to be able to take up nutrients and to be able to withstand wet and or dry. So first thing we did before the Eastside was constructed was built this test plot out at a place that's in Terry Trueblood Lake now, and planted a whole bunch of different plants, all together in great densities, okay?
From seed or plugs?
These were plugs, all plugs. And so we decided, okay, let's see what works. And part of what works is, can they withstand it? As it turns out, the can they withstand it wasn't the issue. It's, are they too aggressive? Some plants really like these situations, and they take over, okay? And so that was the first weeding out. The other thing is that, you know, if you're gonna be building one of these things in a public place, you want it to look nice, okay? Some plants get really tall and floppy. Prairie plants do, you know, they're beautiful, but that's because they're out in a prairie with a bunch of others just like them. They're all holding each other up, okay? And so, you know, you can see here in the foreground, we got some floppies, you know? Well, compass plants don't do very well with these things. They crash over on you. So this is part of the thing, was just figuring out what did work in this area. And obviously, every area is gonna have a little bit different kind of situation. You know, as you go farther north, there's gonna be cold tolerance, it's gonna be an issue. Different areas have different insect problems. Another one was insects. Found that some of the milkweeds are very, very susceptible to aphids, and especially if you're growing them, think about these plants. You're not growing them in a prairie. You're growing them as specimens sitting in these small spots. And so these small spots are magnets. They're magnets for insects, they're magnets for rabbits, deer, and all those things. So then they build it, okay? So this is just the finishing stages where we put in the mix. This is one of the big issues. Well, it's not such a big issue. Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship has a recommendation for a soil mix that you should use for these. The City of Iowa City did not follow it. And Iowa recommends 80% sand, 20% compost, or in the ones over here in Arnold's Park, they're the old mix of 60% sand, 40% compost. I did a whole bunch of work on this stuff, and first I'm a soils guy, and I think sand and compost is not what plants like to grow in, you know. Sand gets pretty dry when it gets wet, okay, and compost degrades when it gets warm. So down the road, you're gonna run out of compost, so you're gonna have sand. So I did this totally nasty 30% sand, 30% topsoil, 30% compost mix, and tested it a whole bunch. The idea is you gotta have enough infiltration. It's gotta infiltrate so that when you pond that water in there, it can accept whatever the design storm is. You try to usually design about 200 to 300 year storm without going over the top. And it has to be able to infiltrate and go down fast enough so that you don't end up with oxygen starvation for your plants, okay? And so I think Guidalls recommends a minimum of around 2.5 inches per hour, something like that. This stuff goes at about 5 1/4 inches per hour right now, and it seems to be working well. Anyhow, it's spread in here, mixed, and we also put in some gypsum dust, which helps soil structure formation. Okay. And then you got to cover it. You can't just have bare soil laying out there because for several reasons. Number one, it blows away, it runs off really easy, and you might as well put, you know, all these, please put your seeds here, sign up, and you have bare soil sitting out. So you need to cover it with mulch. And when you're talking about a biocell of these, I mean, we're talking about 4 acres of biocell here. You don't, you know, go to the grocery store, go to the hardware store and buy 5 gallon. You get a big mulch thing and spread it, okay? And this is one of the big issues is this is an ongoing job. You spread the mulch once and keep on spreading it because all kinds of things happen. Then the next thing is getting things established, okay? The recommendation is to use plugs. You can see it, but good luck. It's really hard to get things established. And the reason these two, with this one, the idea with Eastside is to show people what these plants look like, okay? So rather than have it look like a prairie, this is set up so that people can go in and all the plants are labeled with nice labels. They can go in and say, okay, I'm interested in big blue stem in my yard. They can go see what big blue stem looks like. There's an ID on it. There it is growing in a group of 4 or 3, and you can get an idea of what it's like, okay? And so they've got, what is it, 75 different species here or something like that. And of course, you know, this was 2010. Everybody remembers 2010, don't they? The year of no rain. Yeah, they picked about the worst year they could probably try to establish things. That's what the cups are about. This was an attempt to shield the little things from the sun and also to retain some moisture, and it actually worked pretty well. But this is another issue, is when you're doing these things, it helps to have had someone do the experiment for you to know, okay? Because not everything works. And especially natives can be pretty finicky at times, like lead plant. Great plant to put in here, but they grow incredibly slow. And you know, they're just really tough ones to get going. So yeah, you end up with, you know, planted in little groups of 3. This was 1 year later. They're starting to grow pretty good. Got good prairie smoke and blue flag iris. The blue flag are going crazy out there. They actually have to weed the blue flag iris out of the thing. But the plants, even though they were in this, you know, serious drought the year before, boing, next year they're up and running and going like crazy. So that's the one thing about natives is if you get them established in these situations, they will grow and they'll grow really well. Much more so than cultivars. Cultivars, I think, are a little tougher. So yeah, establishment issues though, lots of establishment issues. Erosion. When you first put your mulch in here, it's just laying on top of the soil surface. And you know, mulch is wood, right? It's less dense than water. You fill this thing full of water, woo, the mulch floats and floats away. So there's this constant re-putting down mulch, moving mulch around until finally what happens is over about a 1.5 year period, the fauna, the infauna in the soil finally start to incorporate parts of the mulch into it, and you end up with a nice bed finally, where it's pretty resistant to erosion after a while. Bugs. Aphids in this case, grasshoppers, you name it. Once again, it's because, you know, these are little islands sitting out there waiting for the bugs to come at them. And then rabbits were also a really big problem out there. And they seem to like certain plants much more than other plants, and deer are the same. But that problem sort of took care of itself. They first of all built little cages around them. Once they get big enough, most of these can take some herbivory, okay? But coyotes moved in too. And so they took care of the rabbit situation. Now it's sort of this little equilibrium thing going on now with the coyotes and the rabbits. So anyhow, this is, 1 year later. It grew pretty quick. And this year it's incredible. It's just like all over the place. So, but the idea here is, once again, to show people what can be done, to let them have this opportunity to come and see the stuff that they might be interested in using in their yard or their neighborhood or something like that. And then also, at the Education Center, Brenda does a plant identification class, where you go out and ID prairie plants when they're first coming up, okay? Or you can come later in the year and see flowers, okay? So there's a multiple use kind of thing going here. And then also, remember this was a parking lot before. Now, there's coyotes here, there's tons of rabbits here, there's mink that have moved in, beaver have moved into the creek. There's a ton of different kinds of birds here now. And butterflies and insects, and you know, it's just totally a different place than it was 2 years ago because of these things that are also serving to protect the creek from this big runoff problem that the creek's had in the past. Now, one of the things that I've been interested in is looking at these biocells. Now, there's a lot of them built, you know, like you're talking about, there's a bunch of them built around here. Nobody's really looked at the performance on them much, which is sort of striking. To really see, you know, what goes on in these things and how do they function, okay? And part of this was an argument that I ended up in with idols about whether this soil mix was going to work properly or not. And so we installed a whole bunch of monitoring wells in one of these cells here, where we're monitoring water levels. We also put in these tubes here, these soil moisture tubes, where we can stick a little, it's like a little wand down in there and measure the soil moisture at whatever level we want to. And in the middle of the drought, in, had rain for like 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. Down a foot, we still had 65% moisture in this biocell. And so the plants never suffered in the drought at all. They didn't have to water this at all, ever. We're also doing running experiments. So this is my fire hose in action. I flood this one all the way to the top, and then record how long it takes for the water to go below the mulch surface. Also, we can, with the soil monitoring tubes, we can actually monitor the water as it moves down in there, because we also have little transducers that measure temperature, and this water is colder than the water that's in there. So we can actually measure the water front as it moves down through this thing to see. What we're interested in is, when the water infiltrates, does it just displace the water that's in there, or does the new water just run through the top? Because depending upon what happens, whatever's in that water either stays in contact with the soil for a long time or doesn't. Okay. And then we have there's a single outlet for this one, and we can monitor the flow coming out of the outlet, and so we'll know how much we put in, what time we put it in. We can also get the hydrograph of what comes out, when it comes out. So we can also measure how much water gets stored in the biocell. And I've been doing this one all spring. So what we're doing is we're going to take it through the whole growing season. So we'll be able to also calculate how much water gets taken up by the plants. We have a weather station here too, so we can get a complete water budget for this biocell, which will be kind of an interesting thing to know, to see if this one has all natives. Next year, we're going to do a different one that has called cultivars. We're going to see if there's any significant difference between natives and cultivars, or between forbs and shrubs, because another one is full of shrubs. So try to get an idea of which is the most effective way to take up the water, to use the water that enters the biocell. Yeah, biocells can go lots of different places. I forget where I took this one. It's in Colorado. Here's a really good place for a biocell, parking lot. You know, usually you have this island in the middle that doesn't serve anything, but place to walk. Well, this catches all the runoff from this parking lot. And it looks nice too. So it's you know, they can go anywhere, and they can go in places that are just usually kind of wasted space anyway. Okay, you just gotta think about it ahead of time. You know, I'd rather this than what's in my front yard. You know, my grass that I have to mow that belongs to the city. I'd rather have them put one of these in mine. This is from Seattle. Okay? And Seattle's been really proactive on this sort of thing, both them and Portland. They have a lot of these sorts of things that are put in. And what they do is they have a subdrain in these that goes into the storm sewer. So basically what it does is it ends up going where it was going to go anywhere. It just doesn't go there as fast. And a lot of the stuff that is in the runoff ends up in here rather than in the storm sewer. What they do is they have these things called curb cuts. You can't really see them here because the vegetation's blocking them, but it's the standard gutter, and then the gutter's broken, usually about a foot and a half break, that allows the water to run into the biocell. And then there's often an outlet farther on down, so that if it starts to fill up, it can either run back out, or else they'll put a little stand pipe with a beehive basket on it that has the water run down to the sewer. So these kind of things we could build these in Iowa really easy. You could put them out there where they're putting a bike path in a ditch. You know, as long as you're doing the project anyway, it doesn't cost anything more to go ahead and do it this way. Now, one last thing I want to talk about is something that we've also been doing with townspeople and with students. These are called Rascal Assessments. This is for assessing streams. Okay. Now, part of the runoff thing, you can either have the water enter a lake, or in Iowa City, it's streams that it runs into, and it has really, you know, detrimental effects. I mean, you've lived in Iowa. You know, most streams aren't very nice in Iowa. They're kind of cruddy, right? And that's because of what's happened as far as the water that runs off. So this Rascal thing it's a program that was developed by the DNR for mostly ag streams, okay, for streams out here. And what the idea is that it's It's a little program that's on a handheld PDA, and it has a whole bunch of pull-down menus, and you record a standard set of observations along the creek. Okay? And you basically walk along the creek, you take whatever interval you decide to take your information at, and you have an assessment that's done by a reach, whichever your reach might want to be, 300 feet or less, okay? And that generalizes things. But then there's also the ability to take observations at specific points on what are called points of interest, okay? The points of interest can be anything you want them to be, tile outlets, debris dam, whatever. Now, the nice thing about these handhelds, you have these rugged GPSs, so it collects spatial data, so you know exactly where your data is that you're collecting. And the ones we have now also have cameras that also are georeferenced, so you can take a picture of the points of interest if you want to, okay? It stores these, the raw data as shape files that you can use in, basically it's ArcMap that uses it, okay? And so all the information you collect is tied to this specific location, which you can do all kinds of cool stuff with that. So this is all the stuff you can record and more. We've been working with the DNR. Both people in Dubuque have been doing some of these in town, and we've been doing quite a bit of them in town. Like I said, this was developed for agricultural streams, but we want to use it in an urban setting. And so there's certain kinds of things in urban settings that are unique to urban settings, and there's certain kinds of observations that are unique to agricultural settings. Like in an urban setting, we don't need to know about animal crossings, okay? Darn it. In an urban setting, we might be interested in homeless encampments, okay? So there's all sorts of things like that that we're working with them to change the pull-down menu system for the assessment. But anyhow, it's mostly a physical kind of assessment, so it's not like Iowa Water. If you're familiar with Iowa Water, it can pair up really well with Iowa Water, but it's a physical assessment, and it's a one-time physical assessment. So it's the conditions as you do it, when you do it, okay? And so you can compile the data. I'll show you a couple of these. And then what the idea is, you work with whoever you're doing this for. In this case, we're working with the city of Iowa City for the most part. And they have information that can be useful to interpreting the data too, okay? Like for instance, they have records of where certain kinds of stream restoration projects may have been done. They have information where they have issues with, let's say, one area where they have a lot of storm sewer problems, that sort of stuff, okay? So working together with them, you sort of maximize the information. And so what you end up with is this picture of one-time ongoing stream stability and other kinds of issues that are in that stream. The city of Iowa City has benefited immensely because they basically don't have enough staff to keep track of all their infrastructure in the streams. But when we do these, we record the outlets that are undercut. We record places where utilities are exposed, that sort of stuff. So it's been very, very useful for them. So yeah, here's a bright December day doing a stream assessment. This is what we do. We usually work in teams of two. We always work in teams of two at least, or three. And here's the handheld. Just walk along the creek, making your observations. The other person making sure that you don't break your leg, or I stepped into a beaver trap. That was really fun. But anyhow, it's you end up like stuff like this. This is in Willow Creek Park in Iowa City. They didn't realize they had this problem. Except for downstream, about a quarter of a mile, their path started falling in the creek. Well, here, the path is back here. By recording this here, they were able to come in the next year, cut these trees out, and deal with this stream bank stabilization project before they had to replace their bicycle path. Okay, so it provides them with information that really helps them out. The students benefit in that, first of all, they get to learn about stream processes, because you get to see it in action, and they get some real live experience going out there, walking around, doing something, and knowing how to do a Rascal assessment can get you a job sometimes, okay? Because Some cities pay people to do these sorts of assessments for them. Yeah, sometimes you find interesting things like this storm sewer that had a little bit of an issue that the city didn't know about. They were wondering why they were getting complaints about a half-mile downstream from a trailer park with odor issues during low flow events. This storm sewer wasn't making it to the sewer plant. And basically during low flow events, the whole stream was sewage. Yeah, I forgot to mention, this guy's sitting here, this is Ted Neal. He's also been involved with this lab. He's an adjunct instructor in science ed. And so we've got science ed students that are getting a degree in science education. They're out there learning things that they actually can incorporate these Rascal assessment things then in their classes when they go teach junior high and senior high schools. They've we've worked up a couple of programs that they're able to use in this situation. So you end up with maps like this that basically, this is Willow Creek, and it shows you where, there's beaver dams and dead animals and cars and metal and trash and all kinds of stuff, which the city gets this, they can go out and clean it up. There's no way they would be able to know where all this stuff is just on their own. They don't have the people to go out there and do it. Also, this is a different part. This is Snyder Creek where we're working now. It's an industrial area. Okay, this is just, the red is severe erosion. So this stretch right here is severe erosion. These two businesses are being really impacted by it. This is Natural Foods, okay? And their parking lot is going south, going down the stream here. So with this sort of assessment, we've been working with them to develop mitigation measures for dealing with this erosion in the stream by controlling the amount of water that's running off into this creek. This is Eastside Recycling right down here. So we just had a meeting with them a couple months ago, and they came down and saw all this stuff here. And so now they've just recently got a REAP grant, and they're going to build a whole series of Biocells along here to catch the runoff. One other thing we're working with them is you don't have to put all the runoff back into the ground. They're expanding their plant, and they're considering building a big storm roof runoff collection tank, and they're going to use it as a heat sink to heat and cool their building. We're also working with the city of Iowa City to see if we can eventually get the code changed so that you can use that kind of water for flushing toilets and stuff. So why not? So anyhow, benefits of these things, yeah. With Rascals, you can identify these problems, and it gives you a whole stream perspective. If you're out there just trying to fix a spot, sometimes the problem isn't the spot. Sometimes the problem is what's going on upstream from your spot. Okay, you can put a lot of money into trying to fix your spot, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And so it really allows for this effective scheduling. If you look at the streams and you look at where the water's coming from as a whole thing, it gives you a lot better perspective on how to deal with it. Because if you try to deal with it just from just the streams or just the runoff, you're missing half the picture, you're missing half the problem. So yeah, the idea here is to try to get back to the system functioning similar to what it used to function like. It's not going to ever function exactly the same, okay? But the idea is to not have all that runoff enter the streams and the lakes as quickly as it does, because it's very detrimental and causes all sorts of problems. And there are ways around it. Oop. So, that's it.
I'm sure.
Any more questions?
Happy to answer any more questions.
When you talk about the plants you split in an area, you seem to have either cultivars or native plants. What are the implications of mixing them?
Why not? Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you tried it?
They haven't been there just because they're trying to do these demos of different kinds, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. I mean, in my house I do. I have some prairie grasses and some natives and some cultivars. Yeah, sure, it would work fine.
The whole city, the city of Okoboji's adopted low impact development, so Tarzan Street, where lives, that whole area in there, all those are rain gardens, and they're all ornamental plants. Some have prairie, but it's like you can just go over there for fun, on the bike ride, and go see all the rain gardens over there.
Oh, cool, that's neat.
So there's like hosta and a lot of,
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of the sky's the limit. I mean, all you have to do is just have plants that, the nice thing is that, you know, if you know places, to go check them out before you build your own. That way you know what works or what might not work, or, you know, try something new, yeah, that's,
Yeah, I try and leave my, I don't have a formal rain garden other than my water goes to a heck of a lot of perennials. And I leave the dead stuff there, I might chop it down, but then I create a mat of decaying vegetation there, which also serves as part of the sponge too.
yeah, that's an option for, instead of mulch. You
Right.
can do that, yeah.
And the irises are incredible without absorbing things. I mean,
Yeah, these, there's the blue flag iris are just going crazy. There's some other things that are pretty, I forget what they're, Brenda's not here, I mean, there's a lot of, some of these natives are basically invasive. Never put buffalo grass in a place that gets enough water that it can really go for it, because it just goes all over the place, yeah. So they move the buffalo grass out of the biocell,
Yeah.
up onto the shoulders.
That's a good great lawn replacement.
It's a really good, yeah, the trick with buffalo grass is getting it established. You gotta really manage it for a year or two. You gotta weed and all that, but boy, once it gets going.
Yeah, I've been trying to fescue no mix, and that just is thick as can be.
Yeah. And see, the one in Iowa City, they're not allowed to burn. Because they're in city limits, so they can't burn this one.
Does Iowa still have urban conservationists?
Yeah, yeah.
And whatever happened to Wayne Peterson?
I just was out with Wayne today. He was over in Arlen's Park today, yeah, we were over there looking. He's in Iowa City now.
Well, we
Yeah,
need
you're
that.
urban conservation.
Derek Mammon,
Yeah,
Urban
that's it,
Conservation,
yeah.
Steve Anderson, now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Derek.
We were out with Derek today, yeah.
But I just was
And
curious
those
if
are-
you worked with Wayne Peterson.
Yeah, I work with Wayne a lot. In fact, Wayne and I, that's why I've been doing this research at the Biocells, because Wayne and I had this ongoing argument, and I'm about to win a case of beer from Wayne, about the mix, the soil mix. Actually, whatever works, I think, is what you want to use. You just got to be reasonable about, you know, what's available and what. The main thing is when you build the things, you got to be careful. That's one of the things I didn't mention. There aren't a lot of people that build these. There are more and more all the time, but really in constructing them, you can really do terrible things to them, especially biocells. Construction people just love to drive those bobcats through these things, and you don't want to do that.
Compact soil.
Yeah, you don't want to compact it. And the other thing is, you always build it knowing, depending on what your soil mix is, that you're going to have some natural compaction. So you start out with not as much freeboard as you think you're going to need, and then it will get your freeboard. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this too, is right now with the Iowa code, the way these are designed, they have to be able to retain that 100-year structure as if no water is infiltrating them at all. And that adds a lot of cost. So what we're trying to do is gather enough information to show that if you build them within certain tolerances, you can build them with less freeboard because you are infiltrating water. And that's what they haven't demonstrated yet, that we're trying to do. We're thinking we can reduce the cost by maybe 20%, which is significant.
I was just going to make a comment. We live in the desert, and I got involved in an art project in the city streetscape. And the former ones are just sort of palm trees and really ratty looking desert plants. And the city suddenly discovered that if you put it in a dip, like you were describing, it collects the water.
Yeah, you can put a lot of stuff in there,
I
yeah.
know, I couldn't believe it. I said, I haven't done this before. But anyway, my point is your discussion about having a gap in the concrete, from the street. I can't wait to get to a computer to email them to see whether they're going to do that or not. Because it's obviously a fairly new concept.
Yeah.
I mean, we do get rain in the desert.
Well, and when it comes there, you get a lot of it at once,
And it
usually,
just
and
all
so
washes
it becomes a
away.
runoff problem. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What's the difference between a biocell and a rain garden?
Okay.
Size.
Size, pretty much. Most rain gardens don't have subdrains. Most biocells do. Biocells, the whole idea of it's a scale thing. The biocell is designed so that the water gets treated when it sits in it for a while. Okay, so it's rain gardens aren't biocells. Okay, they're all called bioretention structures, and a rain garden is just a small biocell. Rain gardens can be built without that sub-chamber that holds water, that's a storage facility. Biocells are all designed with a chamber that actually counts as storage. Then there's the bioswale. The bioswale is a biocell of water. There's a gradient on it. It flows. So bioswales would be things like putting in road ditches, or in the case of that Seattle one, the parking where it flowed. The ones at Eastsiders are bioswales, sort of swale cells. They fall and crack. they flow, they have a gradient, but they're designed at the end not to have any water leak, so it flattens out. Yeah.
Are you worried about polluting the soil at all in the same way that you would pollute the water runoff?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, eventually that's, what happens to this stuff exactly. So the idea is with a lot of the material, for instance, the phosphorus and the nitrogen are plant nutrients, and so the idea there is to capture them and let the plants use them and use them up. Then there's brake lining stuff, cadmium and things like that. And yes, indeed, they will build up in the soils. Probably not excessively, but I guess the question is whether you want them in that soil or you want them in the water. So it's, 6 of one, half a dozen of another kind of thing. Yeah, it's a tough one.
Can you explain this brake lining business?
Brake linings. They're made out of metal, usually, or ceramic, and they have various sorts of metals, heavy metals, usually cadmium is one of them. It's not a lot, but when you have as many automobiles as we do, every time you use your brakes, a little bit comes off. And especially if cars are sitting in parking lots and they get rained on and water runs down, it tends to wash it off. And so it builds up. There's been more, things like the parking lots. One of the other big ones in parking lots is oils and petroleum products. And those do get treated in biocell. That's the whole idea. But brake lining, that's one of the urban runoff things. That's one of the almost unique things to urban runoff is that it usually has higher heavy metal contents, not because of industry. They thought for a long time it was industry, but they know now it's automobiles and whatever. Yeah. And at Eastside, so they have an oil recycling facility and a recycling facility there too. So there's more of that stuff that's going to be in the pavement. Yeah.
So if the soil did become contaminated with a heavy metal like cadmium and you discovered it through testing, would it be possible to plant other things that would be more tolerant of that to help remediate the situation?
I don't know. Steve can
There's
answer.
like research in plants, that you do phytoremediation, certain plants can uptake,
Yeah.
and then you can harvest the plants.
My guess is that the buildup would take so long that it might be a moot point.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Don't know for sure on that one.
We have some baseline data at the parking lot over in Arlington Park.
Yep.
And they measured that.
Yeah, that one, they had a, 80% phosphorus reduction from the water that runs off the parking lot to the water that comes out of the drain, and a 40% nitrogen reduction. And sediment, TDS, total dissolved solids, was like 95% reduction. So, yeah, that's what you want. It's keeping that dissolved, total dissolved solid stuff out of your stream. And the other thing I didn't mention is probably one of the really nasty ones for streams, especially, is temperature. Think of July, 95 degrees, sunny day, get that late afternoon rainfall on there. Water that runs off is like 84, 85 degrees. It hits the stream, and some of you have probably taken aquatic ecology. All those little fish and stuff that are in that stream, ones that don't tolerate warm water go belly up really fast. If you infiltrate that water, it basically that's one of the other things where at Eastside, we go from water that's going in at 80 degrees to water that's coming out at about 58 degrees in 20 minutes. So it takes off that that thermal shock completely, which is really a big issue with small streams. One of the reasons why all our small streams just have, not much of any kind of fish in them, is because most fish can't handle that shock. Zuri's going to get involved with this Rascal thing.
Trying to.
She's been trying to. This semester was a disaster for me. So.
All right, let's give Art a round of applause.